We are live. Good evening, everyone. My name is Seisha. I'm the social media manager at Karis Books and More, which is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore, and also Karis Circle, which is the nonprofit programming arm of Karis Books. And tonight we are so excited to host Jacob Engelsman in conversation with Dr. Betsy Collins for a discussion of Lactation for the Rest of Us, a guide for queer and trans parents and helpers. Lactation for the Rest of Us is an early addition to the literature for queer and trans people who have seen themselves left out of previous informative books on chest feeding and lactation. I just want to shout out our ongoing partners who are co-sponsoring this event, the Feminist Women's Health Center and Southern Fried Queer Pride. I'm going to start by introducing Dr. Collins, who is our conversation partner tonight. Dr. Collins has a full-time clinical practice in OBGYN at Emory Midtown. Her clinical interests are preventative medicine, healthy living through life changes, family planning, and reproductive justice and advocacy, decreasing maternal mortality and morbidity, especially in patients of color, breastfeeding and postpartum care, and LGBTQIA patient care. Before I pass it on, I'm going to introduce the man of the hour, Jacob Engelsman, who is an IBCLC specializing in lactation support for gender diverse families. He's the author of Lactation for the Rest of Us, a guide for queer and trans parents and helpers, as well as many talks and articles on how clinicians can better support LGBTQIA families. We're so excited to have these two incredible community members and healthcare workers here with us tonight. And before I pass it on to Dr. Collins, one more thing. I just wanted to remind the audience that we're going to have a Q&A at the end. For our online audience, you can leave questions in the comment box. And for our in-person audience, you can just hold on to all your comments until our Q&A starts. I also want to remind everyone that buying your books from Karis helps us keep putting on more events like this. So whether you are online or in person, please remember to buy your book from Karis. If you're online, you can do so by clicking that teal button right below our screen right now, where it says Buy Lactation for the Rest of Us. Thank you. I'm going to pass it on to Dr. Collins.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that invitation. So it's really exciting that you wrote this book because in the meantime, we had to travel all over the country telling people about queer lactation. So I think it's really exciting now to have a book to sort of point people towards when we need a reference. Can you tell me a little bit about how you came to write the book?
Yeah, so when I started doing my my lactation consultant training, I was working in a lactation clinic that had this big lending library of a bunch of books, most people who are not professionals haven't heard of, but breastfeeding without birthing, defining your own success, and all of these books that kind of touched on various various aspects of things that would be relevant to non-binary parents or parents who are trans women or parents who have had top surgery, but it was all very piecemeal, right? So reading books about having had reduction or enhancement surgery on your chest, is relevant to lots of people, but it's always written in a way that assumes the reader is a cis woman who,
is carrying the pregnancy.
Right. And had, and had the surgery, had an elective surgery or something. And there's always this assumption. And so, while that information is, important for everybody, as I'm reading these books, I'm like, where's the book that has all of this information for queer people written in a way that, queer people want to be reading it, that it's not, making assumptions about the gender of the reader or anything like that. And it's as I'm reading these books, and again, very early in my lactation career, I'm reading these books and I'm like, okay, this book, A, does not exist. B, I don't really have any business writing this book. I recognize this book needs to exist. I have no business writing this book. So I'm like, okay, in 5 years, if this book still doesn't exist, I'm just gonna write the book. And then there we are. And in the meantime, this isn't the first book to cover this. One that comes to mind came out a year before mine, is called Feed the Baby. It's by Victoria Ficelli. I interviewed her for this book. It's another great book, but so I can't claim that I'm the first person to write a book about this, but definitely, there's not a lot of it out there. So
got it. And did you, as you were training to be a lactation consultant, did you find that you were interacting with a lot of queer and non-traditional families, and that sort of influenced your searching for more information for this community?
So just as a sheer numbers game, right? Well over 99% of our patients are cis and, at least hetero presenting couples. We get, occasionally, we would have, queer women, or people who were surrogates for male couples, but you don't get a lot. But and I feel like that's where that gap in the literature came from, because it's like I'm writing a book for 1 in 1,000 families, but it's like, that's enough to warrant the book existing, and
right.
B, like, it's still, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of people, so like you can still get this book published. It's still going to sell enough copies.
No, that was not my question.
Yeah,
but I was wondering if there was like a family you worked with, or someone where you were like, hey, I have all these books and none of them really answer the question I have, or like the questions aren't answered in one place. I didn't know if you had an experience that was sort of like the spark for this.
Not really. It was always just like, for these families that I know are out there.
Got it.
Like, even though I'm not meeting them personally, at the time, right now, basically all of my lactation work is with gender diverse families. Just because telehealth is such a big thing now, and yeah, so like that's what I do now in terms of lactation support. But yeah, when I was getting my clinical hours, it wasn't
you weren't
a
choosing
lot.
the patients, right?
Sure.
And the patients weren't choosing you.
That's actually, so that's kind of like a segue. But so we felt like it was very important that the people who come to the clinic not have basically like some guy foisted on them as being their lactation consultant. So they always asked very specifically, without me in the room, are you comfortable with Jacob being your lactation consultant today? And like 90% of the time it was fine.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. The only times they ever said no is when presumably the father was also in the room, and the guy was like, yeah, nah, that's not happening.
Fascinating.
If it was the mom who came in like by herself, or like with a sister, or something like that, then we're always fine. Like, yeah, I don't care. Can he make my boobs stop hurting? Like, that's
what you're there for.
Yeah.
Well, it's really interesting that you were able to see those gaps in the literature, and as part of your training, even, that you were sort of noticing that there wasn't a place to synthesize those ideas. So I think that's very prophetic that you were like, hey, I can see that there's not a place for this. And, we need to be addressing the needs of this community more specifically, rather than having to like put all these pieces together.
Yeah, because, the people who this information is going to benefit the most are not people who are going to either have access to, or know about, or want to sit down and read, medical journals about lactation.
Right. And furthermore, may not even see themselves. They may pick up a book and be like, oh, this isn't for me.
Right, right. Yeah, and a lot of those books were written for professionals, not for parents.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's wonderful.
Yeah, so I felt like it was really important to write the book for parents, like
yes,
a book that professionals will also want to read to learn more, but the book's for parents.
Oh, that's great. And I do think it's really important too, because I think more and more patients and parents want to be involved in a way where they're getting the same information we're getting. And I think it's really great to write a book that is accessible to anyone, whether it be professionals or sort of patients, parents, or their helpers and support community. Because I think in this like information age, everyone's so overwhelmed with information, and it's nice to have a place where we can all go kind of at the same time and be like, oh, this is a reliable source, rather than, oh, I've got to pull these pieces out of like so many piles of data and, you know, overwhelming things coming at you.
Right, right. You don't have to look through all of the books for that one chapter that's going to be relevant to you, because I already did that.
Right. Or I mean, I don't have patients that look at books that much anymore. You know, so it's nice to have a place to be like, oh, well, you can pull your head out of TikTok and look at this.
Right.
Which also sort of like streamlines it in a way that's a lot more approachable, rather than just like videos every few seconds and feeling like you can't tell heads from tails. So I think it's a good slowdown as well. I actually found I personally had been pregnant, and that pregnancy is like an amazing time to read a book, because it's like you can just take a small amount of information and digest it and then put it down. Like it doesn't sort of force feed you information. So I think it's really nice to have a physical book in these kind of situations. So tell us a little bit about lactation induction, which when we talked really seemed like a passion for you. And not to like give the whole book away, but talk a little bit about the process of lactation induction and how there are some specific challenges for the trans and queer community.
Yeah, so the thing about inducing lactation is, and so just so we're clear, with like everybody out there in TV land, it does not matter if you have ever given birth. It doesn't matter what gender you were assigned at birth. All that matters is that you have a working pituitary gland, and if you don't, then like you know it. There's pituitary gland is one of those things that if there's something wrong with it, you know it.
Yeah.
Anybody can theoretically induce lactation if they, you know,
have memory tissue and a pituitary.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, no, if you've had mammary tissue removed, then it's a different set of challenges. But yeah, you can induce lactation and make milk. The main thing about like inducing lactation is that so many of the people that I talk to had no idea it was a thing they could do. And then, you know, just like in conversation, I'm talking about the book I'm writing, it comes up and they're like, wait, you can do that? Like, I wish I knew that 5 years ago when I adopted my child. And that just happens so many times that I'm like, all right, like, definitely need to have like a whole chapter, a whole section of the book on this. Because yeah, it's a thing that people are interested in, but only lactation professionals seem to know about it. So yeah, so really the most important thing if you're trying to induce lactation is pumping, because at the end of the day, you're trying to trick your body into thinking you have a hungry baby. And you just need to pump like as often as you would be feeding a newborn, which is every 3 hours constantly. 6-hour break at night.
Talk a little bit about, as you're trying to get someone who's inducing lactation ready, about the time commitment Are we talking a month? Are we talking 3 months?
So I said earlier that it doesn't matter if you've ever been pregnant or not. And while that's true in terms of can you produce milk, there are a million factors on like how long it's going to take, right? So if the last time you lactated was 6 months ago, you just start pumping, you'll start producing milk like within, a couple days. Um, then in turn, somebody who has never been pregnant, has never lactated, and wants to induce lactation, for example, your wife is pregnant and you want to, both have the experience of breastfeeding. What we usually tell parents there is uh, to start pumping 6 to 8 weeks out. But if you can and you're interested in it, you can also kind of try to trick your body into thinking you're pregnant by taking birth control.
Or estrogen and progesterone.
Yes. Yeah, combination. And not for like the full nine months, but just like for 6 to 8 weeks, and then when you stop, like that day, start pumping. And yeah, you're kind of trying to trick your body into thinking you just got pregnant and had a baby. And it's funny because as I'm talking about this, I'm like, I wonder what the OBGYN sitting next to me thinks about all that.
I'm not being interviewed. No, I'm just teasing. I mean, I recommend to people who are interested in inducing lactation that they get the process started as early as they know that they want to do it.
Am I over here advocating for off-label uses of medicine?
No. I mean, that's appropriate. But a person who's gestating, right, spends 9 to 10 months typically with a lot of estrogen and progesterone, and some induction protocols, start with, like you said, maybe 6 to 12 weeks of estrogen and progesterone and slightly higher levels than someone would take, for example, as a contraceptive.
Right.
And then we add in pumping, and often some people will use like a galactagogue, like a domperidone, or sometimes herbal galactagogues, and then pumping.
Yeah. And that's always the trick for me, is trying to explain to somebody how much pumping it is without putting them off it, be like, it's a lot of pumping, but I believe in you, you can do it.
Yeah, I think it's hard to explain how much demanding at the chest or breast is important, even to patients who have a baby next to them. I'm like, or a baby in a NICU. I'm like, your baby would be at your chest a lot, like every hour or 2 hours in the beginning. And so it's a lot of demand, because the mammary glands need to know that you want the milk, because otherwise they won't tell the pituitary to feedback. Right?
Yeah, because it's all supply and demand. So, and especially once you've got, or before you've got the supply established, it's all just this like feedback loop and supply and demand, and making as much milk as you possibly can so that your body will produce more milk.
Exactly.
And sometimes as much milk as you possibly can is being measured in milliliters. And that can be very, disheartening for people. But it's like, the fact that you're making any milk means you're on the right track.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think
it'll be ounces eventually, but.
Absolutely. And I think reassuring people too that your goal may or may not be 100%, but it's okay to not provide every drop of milk that your baby might need, right? And I think a lot of people have these like very intense visions of what could be, and it's not always necessarily it's not always the perfect story, right? And that's okay. Like, it's a process, like you said, and it requires a ton of effort.
Yeah, one of the things that I talk about is the importance of talking about goals and expectations, because at some point you might need to reevaluate your goals and expectations.
Absolutely.
And if you have this idea starting out that you're never going to give your baby any formula, then, that can be a lot harder than if what you're starting out with is I'm going to give my baby 50% of the calories they need. And, maybe we get the other 50% from donor milk, maybe formula, and just already have those wheels in motion in your head. That way, if it turns out, and then if it turns out you can produce 100% of the calories your baby needs, great. But if you can't, then it's not as jarring. You're already there mentally.
Absolutely. How do you advise couples where there's a birth parent and a non-birth parent about co-lactation and lactation induction? Co-lactation is when both parents provide human milk for their baby.
Yeah. So, and most of the time when parents are co-lactating, one of them has induced lactation. I do have one set of friends who were both doing IVF and both got pregnant at the same time and had babies 6 days apart.
Intentional twins.
Yes. I call them half twins.
Yeah.
Anyway, so with them, co-lactation was a different story because they were both producing a full supply. They had 2 babies. But that's kind of the trick, because it's one of those things where you were talking about, people having the perfect idea. But if you have one baby and 2 people lactating, then the baby's not getting 100% of their calories from either of you, then that's going to have an effect on your supply, unless you're also pumping a lot, which is that's a perfectly valid choice to make. But you have to accept that going in, that you're both going to be pumping a lot. And the benefit there, of course, is that then you also have this, stash of milk in the freezer for later use or to donate, or
ideally, right?
Yeah, make soap out of, whatever.
I think a lot of people enter co-lactation thinking that one person will get a break while the other person lactates.
Yeah.
And can you talk a little bit about what that looks like? In, like you said, both people are going to be pumping. Can you tell people a little bit more about the real implications of that statement?
It doesn't actually create less work. It's the same amount of work is now being done by 2 people. And again, it's one of those things where if that's what everybody wants, I don't want to put people off of it. Right. But there is an idea that it's going to create less work, and it does exactly the opposite.
Right. And the reason why both people have to pump is because if you don't, let's say you're the birth parent and you skip a feeding, essentially, your chest will be more full of milk, and then we'll send a message to your pituitary that you don't need the milk. So your supply will go down. So even though your partner might be getting up to feed the baby, you also still have to get up and pump, because you have to drain the breast or chest in order to send the signal to the brain to keep making milk. So this is where I find that a lot of the lactation induction goes awry when I'm doing the consultation. People are like, oh.
Yeah.
Oh, I also have to get up, because I think there's this image of one person will rest and the other person will go feed the baby, and then they'll rest and the other and forth, and it's unfortunately not actually like that.
You can't both be doing exactly 50%, because your body doesn't know that that's the plan.
Right.
You won't just start making 50% of the milk your baby needs. Your supply will,
and it may be over time you can do it that way, but the problem is when your baby's caloric needs are the highest and the baby's the smallest, you have to set up that supply early on, especially when you're trying to sort of ramp up the volume as much as you can. It may be as you're weaning you can do that, or as you're getting to a place where the baby's also taking other foods, maybe at a year. But right in the beginning, it's a lot for both people.
Yeah. And also you have a new baby. So.
Right.
Right. So there's that.
Everyone's up every 3 hours, right? That's a lot. So yeah, I think it's the reality of what co-lactation looks like is so important to be open about, because I do think, again, like you said, people don't talk about it and they think, oh, well, there's two of us here, we can both do this, it'll be great, we'll share the work. When the reality of this is, it's actually, we're both going to work really, really hard.
Right. That's not one of the types of work that you can just split down the middle.
Yeah, and I think that's a big distinction. Do you find that, like, between birth parents and non-birth parents, that it creates any like strange dynamics, or like that people get in, like, have feelings of jealousy or emotional turmoil when both parents are attempting to sort of do this thing and one person's had a baby and the other person is not?
I mean, I think it definitely can, because hormones are like so all over the place for everybody involved, right? For the person who just gave birth, and also non-gestational parents, also have this huge thing happening in their life, and can also have hormonal impacts, right? Like, it is well established that non-gestational parents can also have not PTSD, postpartum depression.
And postpartum depression
Can also have postpartum depression. Like, that's well established.
Yeah.
So yeah. So then when you're adding this other puzzle piece of trying to co-lactate, then yeah, it can absolutely result in feelings and emotions that are totally unexpected, which happened to one of the people that I interviewed for my book. Like, the idea was, they were going to co-lactate, and then as soon as the baby was born, the mom who had given birth, the way that they describe it is that it's almost like a switch flipped, and it was like, I that's my baby, I need to be providing milk for my baby. And in a way that, like, nobody expected, and now years later she's like, that was like, I don't know what was wrong with me. Like,
did she feel like she needed to provide all of the milk to the baby, and so she was like,
yeah, the idea of somebody else feeding her baby suddenly became a very
like unappealing concept to her.
Yeah.
And that person
she started being like becoming very jealous of her wife. Yeah.
Interesting. Did they end up co-lactating, or did that sort of,
for a little while, but then, so she would do something like, or the woman that I had interviewed who had induced lactation would, like, breastfeed in another room, or while the gestational parent was sleeping, or something like that. But there's only like so long you can keep that up for. So eventually she just, she was pumping, and then she just kind of slowed that down, and I think ended up she had a friend in need who she ended up donating a lot of milk to. So,
yeah, it's really interesting how I think a lot of times, like, our emotions and dynamics, again, like we talked about goals, right? It all sounds rosy before you're in the midst of it, you're exhausted, and you may have postpartum depression or anxiety or feelings change, and you don't even know, you like don't recognize yourself in that process, and then you're like, oh my gosh, I'm not comfortable with this, right? You know what I mean? So I think that there is a lot of, hey, like, let's see how it goes, right? Because it's a time full of a lot of change, right? And I think it's hard to imagine what it's going to be like until you're in the middle of it, right?
Right, exactly.
Well, that's exciting. I'm glad that, it's interesting to hear people's stories, because I think we do a lot of talking with people about, like, hey, this is what it might look like. But it's nice that there is a place where we can actually read about how families coped with, hey, oh, I wasn't the one who birthed the baby. Like, what are my feelings? Like, how is this helping me interact with my family? And you know, how do I show love to my child? And like, I just think the dynamics there are very interesting.
Yeah, that's the thing is like, I know so much about lactation from a variety of points of view, but I've never lactated. So I felt like it was extremely important for me to talk about people and like get their real stories so that, you know, it's not just a book full of theory, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
And yeah, like things that you know, we know this works, right? Like
Right.
nothing wrong with theory, but yeah, I felt like it was really important to get people's real stories, and the stories I ended up getting were like extremely interesting, which, you know, it's great when everything goes well and everything goes swimmingly, but you know, it's much more educational when something goes wrong.
I was gonna say, I think anyone who's had a child or like parented knows that most of the time it's something's off. Like, you know, there's just a lot of unexpected, right? And it's actually good to hear like the real life stories of people who have experienced this, because it can be, I think there's this like ideal that we all live in, and you know, we're trying to, you know, mold our lives into a TikTok video or a, you know, oh, I saw this beautiful book and they were doing this and these photos and everything was beautiful and perfect, and then the reality is like, oh, this is really hard work. And, you know, one of us got really sick, or, you know, I mean, all kinds of things happen, right, when you have children. And it's nice to have those real stories where you're like, oh yeah, warts and all, this is what the experience is like. It's not just, you know, a single snapshot of a beautiful family and, oh, you know, things went swimming. Like,
yeah. And then if something goes wonky for you know that you're not alone. Like things go wonky all the time, especially when you're trying to trick your body into doing something.
As I always like to say, I'm like, let's talk about what we have control over. Who would you like present at your delivery? And I don't mean like me. I'm talking about like the person you bring with you.
Right.
Because there really is like, it's not like 2 + 2 = 4. And I think that that's also like a really important point, is that, you know, the reality of this experience is a complicated one. And I think it's good to hear that in a book, because I think you're right. Like, we just picked up, oh, you know, what to expect when you're expecting. And it's so like cis hetero oriented, and, you know, maybe you don't see yourself in it. And then you get to this and you're like, oh, well, I just thought my wife and I would both make milk and it would be great. And then it's like really hard. You're like, oh, you know, I have complicated feelings. I'm not the birth parent. I'm jealous because I feel like the baby wants to spend more time with the other person, or, you know what I mean? Like it's so much more than that. So it's good to hear the real nitty gritty.
And which you get a lot of that in books on fatherhood, but you know, sometimes the non-gestational parent is not a father. So what about that?
I've been one of those too. And yeah, I mean, it's definitely different when the baby didn't come out of you and the baby came out of the person that's like sitting across the room, right? So there are so many dynamics there. But I think it's really important to recognize that they're all valid. It's just, it's more complicated than a pretty picture, right?
Absolutely.
So I'm glad we have this. Can you talk a little bit about supplementation with donor milk or formula? As we know, as you discussed with lactation induction, it can be really variable how much milk you get. And so preparing people with the supplementation options, and how you provide advice about what to do if your supply is not as high as you would like it to be.
Yeah. So really, in terms of supplementation, you've got two main options being donor milk or formula. Both of like, and neither one of them is necessarily the right answer. A lot of it depends on your own specific circumstances for stuff, because, you know, here in Atlanta, you know, a major city, getting donor milk from somebody that, you know, or maybe like a friend of a friend, right? Just there's so many people here that it's, you know, probably pretty accomplishable.
Mm-hmm.
But if you live, you know, in a small town where you don't really know anybody, then donor milk might not be as easily acquired, and then you can run into other complications of, if you're getting donor milk from somebody you don't know, then like, and again, I'm not trying to like scare people off of stuff, but it does happen that like people get donor milk and, you know, maybe it's watered down or like cut with cow's milk, which, especially if it's watered down, that can actually be a big problem because then your baby's not getting enough calories and getting too much water. So it's one of those things that if you're like not a professional might sound like a harmless thing, but it's very much not a harmless
we don't
thing.
want that.
And also you know, might have different feelings about like what the word like fresh means in context of milk, which is a, you know, a big conversation. Like how long can a bottle be sitting on the counter before it's bad? Like, well,
so what you're talking about is peer-to-peer milk sharing.
Yes.
So there's that. So just for clarity, there's two types of donor milk. There's donor milk available from a bank.
Yes.
Which is pasteurized.
Okay. Yeah. If we're talking about milk banks, it's a whole different. Yeah.
Right. And that's expensive.
Yes.
And you have to go to a milk bank and buy it.
Mm-hmm.
It's usually about $5 an ounce. And we only have one milk bank in Georgia, right? We have 0 banks.
What about?
Never mind. We have 0 banks in Georgia.
What about the?
I thought we had a private
Metro
bank.
Atlanta.
Community milk sharing.
Okay. Got it.
It's not a bank.
Got it. Got it. Okay. Got it.
So even in all of Georgia, we don't have one.
Got it. So that obviously is very technically difficult, but people do get milk from each other. That's the peer-to-peer part. People who are queer may have less friends that are, or less community contacts that are making milk, right? Which is also hard. Like you said, you might live in a small town. Maybe people don't like that you're queer and want to lactate or want to get milk, right? And then, like you said, milk handling is a big concern.
Yes.
You want to make sure that whoever you're getting it from stored it correctly, and there are guidelines.
Yeah.
But I think, and I'm sure you would agree that peer-to-peer milk sharing can be amazing.
Right. But then on the other hand, right,
you got to know how to do it.
Yeah, you can, with a little bit of luck, like it can be amazing. And you know, you can create these bonds with people.
Yeah, and like Claire was saying, there are networks that we can use in Atlanta. So if people are interested in peer-to-peer milk sharing, like come up to us after and we could talk to you a little bit about how to get involved or how to find resources on donor milk. But handling is a big one. And then you should never pay for peer-to-peer milk. So if someone was like, oh, I have milk and you can buy it from me, that's not recommended. So you should definitely try to stay away from people who, instead of giving the milk to you, are like, oh, well, you will compensate me for this, because there's a much higher chance that it's corrupted with water or cow's milk or other substances. Because obviously the more you have them, the more you would charge for it.
Yeah.
So there are some good guidelines for how to share milk in a community in a safe way. And I think it's an amazing way to support people if you have extra milk. And it can be a great way to feed your baby if your supply is not meeting your baby's 100% needs.
Yeah.
But yeah, thankfully we have formula as well if need be.
Yeah. And then really the amazing thing about formula is, in fact, like, it's the reason it, you know, is never going to be, you know, specifically equal to human milk, which is that like every batch of formula is, you know, exactly the same. And it's that consistency that you want in formula.
Right.
But, you know, milk is so adaptable and so changing that, you know, makes your milk the ideal food for your baby. So it's, you know, emotionally, it can be a very tricky, fraught thing.
Right. Right.
Because I mean, before formula, oh my God, when formula was invented, the infant mortality rate immediately plummeted. Like,
it's not surprising, right?
Yeah, it's nuts. So yeah, like formula is not perfect. Formula companies are terrible big businesses. Like every big business is terrible no matter what they're making.
Right.
But yeah, formula has saved so many infant lives.
Absolutely. And I mean, both of my babies drank formula, you know, alongside human milk, and whatever we were able to provide, we were grateful that we were able to provide it. But, you know, some babies are going to need supplementation, and working with families to make sure that they understand that, you know, every baby has nutritional needs and we've got to meet them somehow, and we've got to do that safely. Is really important, because you never want someone to be like, oh my gosh, you know, the doctor told me I have to feed this baby 12 times a day, and, you know, I'm doing it. And even if that baby is being fed 12 times a day, if they're not getting what they need and they're not growing or they're getting sick, we need to make sure that people understand that it's not a personal failing, but that, you know, hey, we have these things for a reason. We have donor milk, we have formula, like, let's make sure your baby stays well and that you continue your process with help, so that, you know, both you and your baby can thrive, instead of feeling like, oh, well, if I just do this hard enough, you know, it's going to work. Because I definitely see a lot of that too, is like, again, we have this expectation, right? And people think that it's like, oh, 2 + 2 = 4, right? And if I just do this enough times, you know, that it's going to work. And when the reality is, like, sometimes despite our best efforts, we still have to supplement with something. Yeah. And that's okay.
And that's okay. Somebody is getting our attention.
Is it time for questions?
Yeah.
Let's do it.
All right, so we're going to transition to questions. For folks online, if you have questions, you can put them in the chat and I'll speak them for you. But we'll start with an in-person question if anyone has one to begin with. I have some. I'm going to hand you the mic.
I feel like Claire is the audience plant.
No, really. These came up while you were talking. Thank you both so much. This has been really great. I'm excited to read the book, Jacob, and Dr. Collins. You're the perfect conversant here. I wondered, Jacob, if when you were interviewing folks, if you heard, or maybe in your practice, have you encountered, because I know I have some bias against the literal milk of non-gestational parents, like from healthcare providers, saying, like, you had alluded in one of your answers recently that, you know, if you were not the birth parent, that somehow, like, the milk of an induced, you know, of a non-gestational parent could somehow be like of low quality, which there's no medical evidence for that, but I'm aware of. So I'm just wondering if you've encountered that bias, and then maybe how do you counsel folks around that?
I've definitely talked to people who have that concern. Where they got that concern from, I couldn't specifically say. But I've never talked to a professional who, you know, tried to convince me of that. That being said, most of the people I talk to for this book are queer lactation professionals or parents. You know, not necessarily the people who, you know, would be trying to convince you. But no, it's definitely, it does come up where people, they have this idea that if they didn't give birth, maybe their milk wouldn't be as high quality or have all the necessary nutrients or what have you. And I also think some of it is just just anxiety, a way that anxiety is manifesting. Sometimes it feels like you've got to worry about something, right? The idea that it could be going smoothly doesn't sometimes sometimes you have to convince yourself of that like, no, actually it will be fine.
Well, I think too, there's a lot of misinformation amongst providers about human milk. Like, a lot of people actually know very little about human milk feeding in babies, and we see these kinds of things all the time, like, oh, well, this person is breastfeeding, so we can't use this medication. And I'm like, well, why not? Like, did you read about it? What about this particular medicine are you worried about? And I think similar story, oh, well, you can't use that milk. That milk's not from the person who gave birth. Oh, why not? What, do you know something about this milk that I don't know about? That's news to every wet nurse that ever lived, which is like how humanity survived.
Until recently was a real popular job.
Well, I mean, people fed each other's babies, right? There, from time immemorial, there are people that couldn't feed their babies for whatever reason, right? And either someone else fed your baby or your baby died. Those are the choices, right? And that person probably hadn't just given birth. I mean, unless, like you said, maybe it was like two gay moms and they were like, let's go get IVF together. So, people picked up for other people, right? Yeah. Whether that be, a power issue or, hey, like, we're in this tribe together and, your mom died and here we are. Right. Someone's got to feed you,
you need milk, I got milk.
Right. There wasn't a doctor who was like, oh, that milk's bad. That's not good enough milk. Right. I mean, and that's the thing. It's like, we have to second guess these, like, anytime someone says like, oh, that's not good enough milk, or there's something wrong with that milk, I'm like, hard pause.
Right.
Yeah. Let's talk about why you think this.
Yeah.
And what evidence we have behind your thoughts.
Because even like the list of diseases that are contraindicated, that just like, like write off lactate or breastfeeding, it's like Ebola.
Well,
and like, but it's all like, there's like 4. I can't remember offhand. I listed in my books, but yeah,
a couple of things. But the bottom line is, it's very few things.
Yes.
And a good lactation professional will know what those things are.
Yeah.
And I always approach lactation with, it's probably fine. Well, let me have a look.
Right.
Like, I always assume it's going to be okay until I read otherwise. And I never even give the impression that it couldn't be fine until I've looked it up, because all it takes is one negative. Oh, they said that there's a concern. I'm going to stop.
Right. Or even like,
I'm not going to use this milk because the doctor said it might not be good enough.
Also, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this talk.
Okay.
You started talking about medications, and I'm wondering about CBD, which I know you're not supposed to like feed your baby if you have CBD in your system, but I've also been told that it can't be used for like cream for like the adult, because then the CBD will get back into your skin and then you'll keep being at risk of breastfeeding. So I was like, what do I do with all this CBD?
There's very few topical like lotions. Even, we use steroid creams and stuff in pregnancy. Unless you're using it directly on the area where the baby, like on the breast, I would say it's probably fine. Sure.
Thank y'all so much. Really appreciate y'all. I was wondering if you could talk more about domperidone and how y'all counsel people about whether or not to use that, and kind of considerations around that medication. And then as kind of a second question, if you could speak more to the availability or lack thereof of the medication in the US specifically for lactation induction, and kind of the dynamics surrounding that.
I'm gonna let you take this one.
Okay, so just a little backstory. Domperidone is a gastrointestinal medication that kind of side effects as encouraging lactation. So In most of the world, I'm given to understand, you can just get domperidone or get a prescription for domperidone for the purpose of inducing lactation pretty easily. The main protocol used for inducing lactation, the Newman-Goldfarb protocol, assumes you will be able to get domperidone because it was published in Canada, where, again, readily available. In the United States, you cannot get it.
From a U.S. pharmacy.
Right. Can you get it for the gastrointestinal? Do you know?
Or no, it's not.
It's not available at all.
It's not a medication that's used in the United States.
And so sometimes getting a doctor to recommend you to take it for the purpose of inducing lactation, can be a little bit tricky. But acquiring it, especially in the United States, while, can be, you can't get it here, like
you have to mail order it from a Canadian pharmacy.
Or like drive to Canada.
Yeah, so mail order is typically, I think, the way most people obtain it here. So you would receive a prescription from your doctor and then send it to the mail order pharmacy, and they would mail you the prescription. And that's legal. It's not illegal to receive domperidone from an international pharmacy. Most people use Canadian pharmacies, and there's several online that seem reputable.
But I'm given to understand that getting a doctor to write the prescription can also be can kind of be the tricky part. So if people just want to circumvent that entirely.
Yeah, I don't know if you can get it. I don't know where you can get it without a prescription. You might have to maybe use a Mexican pharmacy. They have it available in Mexico where more drugs are over the counter. But I would say in the like breast and chest feeding medicine community, like it's well liked. And people, I think a good like breast or chest feeding medicine doctor would be happy to write for it. Like I don't think it's not a scary medicine in the sense that it doesn't have a lot of side effects and there are very few contraindications to using it.
Yeah, the big one is if you have a history of cardiac arrhythmia, it can cause problems there. But if you have a history of cardiac arrhythmia,
right, most other people tolerate it fine. So, but yeah, that's, and I mean, I would say if I had a patient that wanted to use a galactagogue, that would be the one I would recommend.
Yeah, the other big one that people gets brought up a lot is Reglan, which has more severe side effects, like neurological side effects, which especially, of course, sometimes neurological side effects are worth it. But when you have a, new infant and you already have these, it's such a fraught time in your life, then.
Yeah, I would just say in general, like I've stopped writing it for lactation induction and for augmentation of breastfeeding because I have seen that it has much more dramatic side effects and I am less confident that it's a good thing.
Yeah.
For what you get out of it.
We have we have a question from Alicia online who says, I'm interested in the psychological impact of co-lactation or inducing lactation. Did you explore the emotional side of inducing lactation and how parents cope with the challenging moments of inducing lactation? In practice, I have found a lot of heartbreak along with a lot of joy in the triumphs, and I'm wondering what others have used to cope with the tough parts.
So that was a lot of question, but just to address the end of it there about coping with the tough parts, I feel like that's where the word that comes to mind there is community. That even if you don't again, don't live in a big city, if you live in a small town, there are numerous online communities for either like queer lactation specifically or inducing lactation specifically. If you're lucky, I'm sure you can find a community of specific hyper specific to queer people inducing lactation. And then if you do live in an area, where you can join a parents group or parents to be, or even just, making queer friends. But that's where, just having people to talk through your experiences, people who have been through similar experiences or are currently doing it. I feel like the biggest aid there, with so many problems that people have in their lives, one of the biggest best ways to get through that is, through a community of peers.
Yeah, I do think peer support is really important, especially for parenthood and especially for lactation, just because it like we talked about, not all sunshine and roses. So having people to talk to, and especially people who've gone through what you've gone through, is really helpful. Just because I think, it's that person who's maybe got a baby that's 3 months older than your baby, mm-hmm. or you know what I mean? It's just like, hey, I just went through this and this is what happened. Or hey, we just did the same thing. Like,
right.
And it's nice to be like, oh, okay, I'm not the only one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think it's also a really good idea sometimes to just like go outside for a few minutes.
Right.
My sister-in-law once said, she's like, you know what? One day when the baby wouldn't stop crying and I just needed a minute to myself, put the baby in the crib where the baby was safe, and I went outside and drank a cup of tea, and then I came back. And I was like, yep, that sounds like a very good idea sometimes. Right. You just like, sometimes you just need a break for a second. And parenthood is like this super intense full-time job, and everyone needs a break, right? Whether that be like, hey, partner, tap out, or whether that be like, hey, friend, I need a break. Give me an hour. I just need to take a long walk or whatever. But like having a time where you can be like, okay, I just need to like decompress for a second. I think is really important, and it's also not a failure. Like,
right.
It's okay to be like, I need a pause here.
Yeah.
I got to go collect myself. I need a hot shower. I need to, take a walk, go to a friend, see a friend, go to a class, whatever.
Yeah.
Because I do think it's a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. It's okay to ask for help, and you need to know in advance who you're going to be asking for help.
Yeah. And I would also like to say too, like, how many people offer to help? Right? So many times people are like, oh, can I help you with something? What can I do? Come over and take care of my baby and let me leave the house for an hour.
Take this baby.
Right. Or like, let me take a hot shower and I just need a minute to myself. Okay. Like, be specific with what actually helps you. Because I think there's also this like, oh, well, can you cook me a hot meal? And I mean, hot meals are really good. I highly recommend them. But if what you need is like someone to come over and do a load of laundry, tell them,
mm-hmm.
I need you to come do a load of laundry. I'm losing my mind over here. Right? Like, be honest, because people say they're going to help you. And maybe there are some people that won't actually do it. But, it's not actually that helpful to you to have someone come over and do something that's not helpful.
Right.
Right? Mm-hmm. Like, don't pretend it's all okay and be like, spend an hour getting dressed up, and then, you're like hosting friends and like no. Like, literally be like, this is what I need.
Right.
Can you do it? Okay, great. We're going to do that. And it's not going to be pretty, but like, I need help.
If we don't have any more questions in person, speak now. Or you can ask Jacob after.
I bet Claire is old.
Speak to what you just said.
Yeah.
That I think it's important for people to know that if someone offers to help you, they genuinely want to help you. A lot of people think that they're saying that you say.
Yeah.
But most of the time, people do genuinely want to be helpful.
Yeah, and I think
it's important to take advantage.
I think that's true. And I also think that it's really good if someone offers you unsolicited advice, that person doesn't actually want to help you.
Unsolicited advice is always criticism.
Because 100% of the time when I hear someone offer a pregnant person unsolicited advice, your response should be, this baby is doing exactly blah, blah, blah days. You know what I really need is for you to come over at 5 a.m. and start doing some laundry. So shut up about how much coffee I'm drinking, okay? So yeah, like if you're offering to help somebody, be that person who shows up and does the thing. And if you're offering a lot of criticism because you think you know better, zip it.
And if they are, just saying that to be nice, you're going to find out real quick.
They're not going to come. And you know what? Great. Don't
call the bluff.
Yeah, exactly. See them in a couple of years.
Okay, great. On that note, I'm going to say goodbye to our friends online. I just want to remind y'all, if you want to buy a copy of Lactation for the rest of us from Caris, which I do recommend because it supports our mission and allows us to keep putting on more incredible events like this, you can do so by clicking that teal button right below where we have our little screen put up. But thank you everyone online. Have a good night.